A huge cargo ship struck aground on Tuesday while traveling through the Suez Canal, a vital shipping route that connects the Mediterranean and Red Seas via Egypt. This caused traffic on the key commerce route to stop. Just keep watching this video to know about the ship that caused a traffic jam. Body on March 23rd, just before daybreak. The weather at the canal zone was getting worse, and the winds coming from the south had picked up. This caused the ships waiting to cross to radio in anxiety. The Ever Given was one of the biggest container ships ever constructed, measuring almost as long as the Empire State Building in height. Merely a few yards separated its keel from the bottom of the waterway. It was exhibiting symptoms of distress well before it ran aground. In order to minimize disturbance to international trade, Egypt, a country that much depends on the canal's profits, is currently redirecting ships to an older waterway. There is already a lengthy line of boats waiting to pass the canal as a result of the congestion. Someone with knowledge of the grounding inquiry claims that the Canal Authority had no system in place for tracking weather or alerting ships to impending storms. However, the warnings were quite plain. Two people involved with the investigation said that the Ever Given and other ships were dragging their anchors, a clear sign that the weather was exceptionally harsh. The captain of the ship, Krishnan Kantavel, made the decision to go nevertheless, possibly caving in to the same intense business pressures that have pushed the industry to construct ever larger container ships over the previous 15 years. Because Western consumers were under lockdown during the coronavirus pandemic and had gone on an internet ordering binge, the global shipping business was already experiencing pressure. The goods the ship was carrying from Asia to Rotterdam, headed for consumers in Europe, would have been delayed if they had waited. As Ever Given made her way through the Suez Canal and into the Mediterranean Sea, the sun rose. However, an overnight desert storm on board the Ever Given masked 2 days down and tossed it around a ship the size of 4 football fields. The captain managed the crucial choke point for global shipping while gazing out of the bridge windows. Next to him were 2 Egyptian aviators who were required to go with all large ships for the duration of the half-day trip. Then, an unwelcome burst of wind transformed the pile of 17,000 containers into a sail. Shortly afterward, the ship's bow collided with the canal's eastern wall, causing the vessel to tremble and obstructing traffic on the Suez Canal, which is a vital component of the world's supply network. Strong winds were initially cited as the reason for the grounding, but the New York Times investigation revealed that the ship's misdirection may have been caused more by a series of orders from the Egyptian pilots, which caused the ship to spiral out of control and crash into both banks of the canal. It took him a moment to realize what he was looking at when it reappeared just before 8 in the morning, with its enormous white lettering, Evergreen, painted down its sides in honor of the ship's Taiwanese charterer. The ship was wedged diagonally across the canal, moving from the west bank to the east. The captain and pilots back and forth had become acrimonious at some point between the ship's departure into the sandy horizon that morning and its return as the most popular meme on the internet. In addition, the Canal Authority disregarded its own regulations by refusing to supply tugs that would have assisted in keeping the ship on course. However, the Canal Authority has not moved to modify its protocols or admitted the error, absolving its pilots of any responsibility. Egypt has pledged to make reforms on other matters. Egypt has announced plans to enlarge the canal's narrowest portion, where the ship became stopped, in order to address one of the main causes of the grounding: the absurd mismatch between the size of the Ever Given and the width of the canal. Additionally, though it hasn't provided specifics, the Canal Authority has stated that it will provide its pilots additional training. However, there have been few signs of changes to come, despite appeals from marine safety experts for the industry to re-evaluate the size of container ships, which have grown to Leviathan proportions as it looked for savings, and for ports and canals to make adjustments to handle them. Almost as soon as the ship reached the canal, that dynamic was put to the test. After traveling for a few miles, the ship started to weave, possibly due to the wind pushing against its 14-story load, which was acting as a large sail. Whatever had caused the initial zigzag trying to alter course by the Suez pilots proved to be ineffective. According to a person familiar with audio recordings from the ship's voyage data recorder, one of the pilots made a series of unusually strong directions, calling to the Indian helmsman to steer hard right, then hard left. And disagreement broke out between the pilot and Captain Canthavel when the pilot sent the ship as far as it could go in one direction before Captain Canthavel intervened and corrected it. Satellite data indicates that the Ever Given was already picking up speed as it lurched up the canal. The ship was told to proceed full ahead by the first pilot. Another quarrel between the pilots resulted from the second pilot's attempt to override the command. According to one of the people involved with the investigation, the first pilot whirled on Captain Canthavel when he attempted to intercede and slow down the ship, saying something that sounded like a threat to walk off. Experts speculated that by increasing speed, the pilot was probably attempting to regain control of the rudder, which operates best when water is rushing past it. However, the ship was now rapidly pushing against an enormous wall of water, creating unstoppable momentum and leaving the Ever Given vulnerable to opposing forces. The pressure of the surrounding water was decreasing as it raced faster and faster between the ship and the canal wall. The result was that the Ever Given fell victim to what sailors refer to as the bank effect, which is a phenomenon where the bow is pushed away from a bank and the stern swings toward it, akin to a car being drawn into a truck as it passes it on a highway. Clockwise and counterclockwise, whipsawing of the ship occurred. It will sink dangerously low in the water when its speed causes the water pressure beneath its hull to drop. The gale that morning was not the cause of the errors that resulted in the grounding. Shipping experts have been warning for years that container ships had grown too big to operate in many ports and canals safely, despite the fact that dozens of other freighters the size of the Ever Given had passed through the Suez the year before without any issues. Many of the world's canals, such as the Suez, have been dredged and extended to add a second lane in 2015. This is done to provide room for larger ships. However, the Ever Given's 18-mile stranded section of the canal was not extended. When it did, the tugboats on the canal were unable to move it. The Suez Canal Authority has acted quickly to stop any future delays in the canal's flow, which provides Egypt with much-needed foreign exchange more than $5 billion annually. Egypt said in May that it would enlarge and deepen the canal portion where the Ever Given became trapped. More recently, Egypt said it will buy a fleet of stronger tugboats, a support ship, and cranes to lessen the weight of any future grounded ships. Ever Given blocked more than 300 vessels at both ends of the canal, including 5 additional similar-sized container ships. Among them were 24 crude oil tankers and 41 bulk carriers. Roughly 16.9 million tons, 37 billion pounds of deadweight were carried by the impacted boats. Many stayed put, while several docked at local ports and anchorages. 2 Russian Navy warships, thought to be the sole military vessels impacted by the obstruction, as well as the sister ship of the Ever Given, Ever Greet, were also impacted by the disruption. In shallow waters, particularly given the exponential increase in ship size over the last 10 years, are still rather mysterious and require more research. Later on, the case was resolved for an unknown amount following 3 months of back and forth. The ship was once more on its way by Tuesday. The ship was placed under possession in April and May, while the Suez Canal Authority and the ship's owners worked out a compensation arrangement. SCA head Osama Rabi threatened legal action to stop the ship's departure and wanted a $1 billion settlement for lost earnings and salvage operation expenses. The crew, who would essentially be held until the matter was settled, caused concern. On 7 July 2021, Egyptian authorities released the ship after an undisclosed settlement was reached. Please click like and subscribe button to get more interesting videos. And remember to activate the notification bell so you can be notified whenever we make a new post.